have a lot of it area. It gets from December. Okay, in Minnesota, they've already had snow in October. But sometimes in Minnesota, it stays warming again this year. Boston's a little different. We have thaws, we get ice. We get thaws, we get ice. We're stupid and don't. So what do you think happens every year? Blackouts, people stay. In the States, right, the shortest, its own holiday. No, we don't. Abraham Lincoln with their own. No, it's one day, it's a month from school. The other is school. See, you have school vacation week. The kids can bring home the germs that they have been storing since January when they came back. Everyone, and let's go. In the Boston area, it was from, goes away for this way we can max the entire country, and it means you have working days because it's. You know you have my holiday, and even lawyers have to give it off in working days, vacation week. So is either away in some variety. You can't being a really good enough. It's like the last December. You can't lucky. You get a really plan on it. So this is not a real. And if you are working in this organization and you see, I want you to start working on project, or maybe you add project 1. So you could start project 3 and you have that question and finish project 2. So what does this really mean? Portfolio? No, it's not a project portfolio list of things. This is a form of, because there's this big that says this is the line that says face facts. When I've named them in there, one is number 1. Right, and projects. And we've named them and said we actually have, if we try and look we don't happen, but that happen. And if it's January, pretty sure, even for February, I think you have a little wishful. And certainly by the time, you don't really. Now, there are some on a lower or mid portfolio, you get a user group meeting, conference, or anything like that. That's not going to change. I didn't feel like I was quite ready to start August 20th. I didn't have a choice, right? They couldn't say, give me another day, right? So when they're setting a portfolio and saying, oh, I know this is going to happen, but in the meantime, by week, and then week iterations, people are actually doing. So you want the low level to see what people are doing, corresponded to this high. You can see what the whole organization, some decisions to be available. And project 3, or even March, not a priority projects. The keys to organization are thinking about what I have to do, what work on to finish. actually had to recommend to some, they have so much technical, and they have so many, there's no transparency. The technical debt, the defects, until the beginning, they need the transparency to give them. Well, you're talking about of person days, that like that, of technical. I actually think they have requests for features. Have buckets to see how do you manage them. One of the that's really important is if you allocate all the people at the beginning, and you allocate all the money at the beginning, you can't learn from anything, right? My daughter learned a lot by having a fast failure. Did she wish she had failed with a little less money? I think so. On the other hand, it wasn't a disaster because we had planned for it. So if you have this opportunity to incrementally fund projects, you know, in software, let's leave aside capital equipment for now. In software, almost all of the money in a project is in salary and overhead. Almost all the money. And you have very little control over that. You think you have control over salaries? Well, first of all, there's salary ranges that make it acceptable or unacceptable pay. And your management has decided where to put this office. And overhead is at least another third on top of salary, at least. Sometimes more than that, closer to a half. So you actually have very little control over the expenses. You have a little more control over capital equipment. And that's where it's really important to say, can we get a little experience with this project before we have to commit to the capital equipment? Can we delay this decision as long as it is responsible, right? Not any longer than responsible, only as long as responsible, right? And that's a useful question to ask. Now, those of you who are doing hardware who have non-recurring expenses, that's another decision, right? As soon as you go to hardware, you have the expenses of moving to physical form. And you want to delay that movement to physical form as long as possible. That's why the hardware people use iterative life cycles on their projects. Have you ever watched hardware people? They iterate, they simulate, they test. Sometimes they work in time boxes, sometimes they just iterate. But they iterate like crazy to figure out what they know and what they don't know about the hardware. So you have many opportunities to reevaluate the portfolio. And you want to think about when does it make sense to do which kind of evaluation. And is there any way to hold off on the budgeting thing as long as possible? Now, there's a bunch of questions that I really like to ask. And you'll notice that the first question here is qualitative. And all of the other questions on this slide are qualitative. Because I bet all of you know how to lie with ROI, return on investment. I am great at it, and it makes me feel just a little slimy. So I refuse to lie with ROI anymore, and I ask different questions. And the first question, the 0th question, is should we do this project at all? Now, asking that question, you might say, of course the answer is yes. Why would it be on the list if we shouldn't do it? Are there things that happen in your organization that don't make sense because they've always done it this way? There are projects like that. There are people's pet projects. There's the CEOs or the CIOs or some CXO pet thing that they want to have done. There are reasons to ask, should we do this project at all? And then, of course, there are lots of other questions. I really like the two on the bottom. Do we know what success looks like for this project? And is there waste associated with the lack of this project? Right? And you should look at the other questions. They're all pretty useful. But you'll notice that if you look at them, you say, okay, if we're ready to adequately fund it and staff it, then we probably can think about doing it. If we're not ready to even fund it or staff it, is it even worthwhile to think about? Does it even make sense to have on our radar? Right? What's the point? There's no point here. And now, for those of you who think we have to have quantitative questions, yes, you can certainly ask a bunch of quantitative questions. You can ask about monetary return, which is a little different from return on investment. You can ask about revenue curve. I really like the customer acquisition and the customer retention questions, right? And those of you who are internal, who are in IT organizations whose customers are internal, you should be asking those questions. Because not all of the people want all of the software that you're giving them. And if they don't want it, why would you waste time doing it? Or maybe in that form. Maybe there's a different form that you want. I really like asking, is there anything to do about operating costs? We tend, in software, we tend to be the shoemaker's children, right? I am always astonished. Who said yesterday that they were somebody still using PVCS? Because was that another one of Michael's things? I can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember. And okay, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, PVCS was a really good tool. I haven't kept up with it because there are other tools that are better, right? So the idea is that a lot of us work with very old tools. I made a mistake before I bought this computer, and I kept my previous computer for almost 6 years. Don't do that. Right? There's no reason for anyone in our industry to have a computer older than somewhere around 2 or 3 years. And yeah, I know those of you, there are a bunch of you are going to say, I'm not going to fight that fight with my management. Okay, as long as you've made that a conscious decision, not an unconscious decision. So if you ask the question, how will this project move the organization forward? Now you might have a bunch of quantitative data. So I think of these questions, the qualitative and the quantitative questions as sort of bracketing. Should we do this project at all? How will this project move the organization forward? That starts to get at why we should do this project and where does it rank. Now you can start thinking about the business value of the project so you can rank it. So when I talk about doing work that's currently valuable, it's very tempting for especially senior managers to say, well, yeah, we have to do the work that's currently valuable, but every time you hear that but, that's
screeching home.
Right. What Mary said, screeching home. Because what that means is they have forgotten about the short term and the immediate term and the present. They are still thinking about the future. And the future is a great place to think about, but you can't staff for the future. You can't plan for the future. You have to take a much shorter horizon to say, here's what we can do now. Here's the value we're going to get now. And once we've gotten that value, once we've learned from that, now we can start thinking about the future. So one of the things that I've said to people is, if you had to rank your products, how would you rank them? Right now, this is an interesting question. Do you rank them by the amount of revenue they give you now? Do you rank them by the waste associated with them? Do you rank them by the operating costs? I don't know how you want to rank your products, but you want to think about it because a project has to do with adding functionality to a product. So you really want to think about what are the most important products for us to spend our time on. I worked for a company a number of years ago. Oh, actually, I can say it. I worked for Symbolics for 5 years. We went on a strategic planning retreat. It was in the winter in New Hampshire. We didn't get our nails done and we didn't play golf. So at least it was a useful strategic planning retreat. And we had these 5 areas going into this retreat of product, trying to develop and support and manage and all that stuff. And we came out of this strategic planning retreat with focus on 5. We got nothing done over those 2 days except this really fabulous tagline that means nothing. Because how do you focus on 5 things? You don't, right? You focus on one thing. So we had not made a decision. We could not rank the products. And Symbolics is not a company these days because they could not decide what business they were in. The project portfolio is the manifestation of your strategy. If you don't know what business you're in, you can't rank the products. And if you can't rank the products, you can't rank the projects. And you can't decide which one to do first, second, and third. This goes back to eliminating management debt. You have to make a decision. And the nice thing about using Agile is that you get every time box to remake that decision. You don't have to live with the decision for years. You can live with the decision for 2 weeks, maybe a month, right? You don't want to, even if you work in 1-week iterations, you probably don't want to reevaluate the project portfolio every iteration because people really do feel like they're getting whiplashed. That's not such a good idea. So you want to rank the products so that you can rank the projects. You want to be able to rank the features for a product so you know when you've done enough, right? And when I help people transition to Agile, one of the things they always say to me is after 6 months or 9 months, depending on how long their iterations are and how big their projects are, we're amazed at how little we had to do to get to a release. Inevitably, right, we think it's a 1-year project because we have to get everything in. You get somewhere around here and people say, oh, it's pretty close to done. And then it is done. Wait, you don't want the rest of this? No, we can release without it. This is an amazing thing that until you've actually transitioned, it doesn't happen because you don't have the opportunity to show people the demo, to show people the progress that you've made. And in order to know that, you have to have enough market knowledge, whether it's market knowledge of the people inside your organization, because you're an IT group, or market knowledge of people outside the organization, to know when the team has done enough. And that's why the product owner job is the hardest job, or whatever you call that person, in an Agile team. It really is the hardest job. Now, when I started doing this with management teams, I've done this with PMOs and with management teams at a variety of levels, they all take me aside and say, JR, if I'd known what this ranking meeting was going to be like, I would have been sick today. And the reason they say that is because you have to collaborate. And the collaboration is really the hardest part. I think we can do this. This is a small enough room. So let me ask you this question. How have you worked across the organization and been successful? Let me add the six. We don't have to hear about the unsuccessful cases. How have you worked across the organization and been successful? Yes.
We started getting our developers involved in sales meetings. And so they had better visibility into what the customers were requesting.
So getting developers involved in sales meetings has been a helpful piece of collaboration because now they understand why does sales want this, right? Which is a good thing. Harlow?
Get the customer support group to have equal power to the sales group on product direction.
So give customer support equal power. You said this even better.
Equal power to
the sales group, so that you can help the product go in the direction that makes the most sense for the customers, right? So sales doesn't get to trump customer support. Customer support doesn't get to trump sales, but they both have to somehow agree. Okay, we'll do this now, and then we're going to do this, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we bring in a usability consultant on all of our UI development work and sort of leave him the job of bringing the customer service people, the product owners and the development team together to figure out how it should all come together.
So it's an interesting thing where you use an outsider, right? You're using a UI consultant to help bring the different factions, the sales, customer support, whatever you call them, marketing, I can't remember, together. But the nice thing about using an outsider is that everyone can blame the outsider. and no, it really helps salvage your relationships inside the organization, right? Because you don't, and if everyone says, well, I don't know what, I'm going to call him Joe. I have no idea who he or she is, but, right. But Joe is the one who, beats it into us that we have to make a decision. We can all gang up on Joe, but in the end, he helps us make a good decision. And you come from a different place. It's not, no one's using hierarchical power in the organization to get their way, which is really helpful. There was another hand. Yes, sir.
We do monthly product priority reviews, so we have dedicated teams to each product line, and we get the senior stakeholders together from support, product management, sales, engineering, the VPs in a room, and stack rank. These are the priorities, and you go about 10 or 12 lines down, and then people stop caring.
Right.
And it's like, this is the focus, and every single month we review those and make sure that those are still right and whether or not they need to change.
So sounds like you're actually evaluating the portfolio. You have a cross-functional leadership team that gets everyone together and you stack rank. And when you, as you said, I'm repeating it for people who might not have been able to hear. When you get down to 10 or 12, you don't have to rank anything beyond that, because you can't get through those 10 or 12 in 1 month. And since you do it monthly, everyone knows it's a periodic ranking, and you don't have to worry that it's going to take forever.
And we'll skim down just to see, is there something hiding in there that is actually important that needs to get highlighted, but we won't rank it.
Yeah, and so he said we'll skim down to make sure we didn't miss anything, right? But other than that, we don't have to do anything. Yes, sir.
I've seen teams do similar things with risks. So, like, this project has these risks that might derail it, but actually surfacing that in a room with the CEO, with CTOs, and have everybody say, okay, these are possible problems. Do we need to address them? Are we okay with where they are?
Right, and so if you take risks into account, especially if you have senior management in the room, now they understand we can't just avoid this stuff. We have to pay attention. We can choose not to do anything. Right? It's this conscious decision that provides transparency. So there are a bunch of barriers to collaboration, and part of the problem is that project portfolio management is a zero-sum game. It's because one project is going to get to be number one project is going to get to be number 2, one project is going to get to be number 3. But if you don't play the zero-sum game inside the organization, you can't win outside, right? This is how you actually win against your competitors, by making the ruthless decision about what is most important for now. So there's a bunch of stuff about collaboration. And one of the things that I see a lot is that you have to figure out a way to build trust, right? I suspect that your cross-functional leadership team discussions might get quite loud.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are people who have strongly felt positions and principles and all this stuff. And I hope you guys are using principled negotiation approaches. So there's a couple books I want to mention. If you haven't read Fisher, Ury, and Patton, Getting to Yes, it's a small little paperback book about principled negotiation. And it talks about the difference between the principle behind your decision and the position you take for a decision, right? The position, one of the things I suggest is that everyone come to this meeting with their straw man portfolio and their principle, right? The idea is you have a principle behind the decision. Based on that principle, you would make these kinds of decisions just so you have a place to start. If you only come with a position and not your principle, you can't articulate why you want to make these decisions. So Fisher, Ury, and Patton, Getting to Yes, fabulous book. Get one for everyone in the group. That's the piece, right? I have completed that little bit. I've gotten to a finished state. I've gotten to a wait state on that. I don't have to think about it very much more. In the same way that you're dealing with projects, if you've finished enough, then you can go on to the next project. And the project portfolio makes it really clear. What should people be doing? What should they be ignoring? If you're working on the number 4 project and you have a question that only someone on the number 1 project can answer, and you have a published project portfolio, would you ask that person? Like I said before, maybe at lunch, right? Maybe send them an email so that you can say, when you have a chance checking your email, I have this kind of a question, who should I go to? Because if someone's checking their email, they've already made the context switch, but you don't interrupt them, right? So that interruption, the having to service the interrupt part is done, and that's really key. I want to know that I'm putting the best people on the most important work in the organization. Now, I have worked in organizations where they hired from the bottom of the barrel. It was painful. It was really, really painful. I only had them as a client for 2 weeks because I couldn't take it, right? Because these people had no idea what I was talking about. So it was really important to say, you know, they don't have anyone I would consider the best. But there are plenty of organizations where if you have these people who are the best and you pair them or somehow have them mentor or coach people who might not be the best, now you can bring the entire organization's capacity in. Right, Arlo, you talk about that with have the least qualified person do this thing, whether it's a task or a user story or whatever, pairing with a qualified or a most qualified person. No,
Someone at random.
Someone at random is even better. Now you've really got the knowledge moving through the group without the prejudices that the most qualified person brings. So a lot of people, when I was trying to write this down and when I was working with my clients, said, okay, so it makes sense, rank order the project. I got that part. But Agile? Do I really have to go to Agile? I say, no, you don't have to. It helps. Helps a lot, right? Time boxes, releasable product at the end of the time box. It makes it easy to reevaluate the portfolio. Don't you want to make your job easier? And they'll say, well, I kind of want to make my job easier. But the people can't transition to Agile. You got smart people? You want to tell them that this would make their jobs easier too? They only have to work on one project at a time. And in exchange for that, they have to have releasable product every 2, 3, 4 weeks. You think they're not going to jump on that bandwagon? And so when I first, and of course I asked it just that way to a client. This is why I'm outside the organization. And the client said, well, I will ask them. Because I can't believe that they would give up knowing what they know about waterfall to move to Agile. And I said, what do you think they know about waterfall? They said, well, they have all these documents that allow them to predict when they'll be done. And I said, I just did an assessment for you. None of your projects ever finish when you think they're going to. None. 0. You haven't had a project finish on time in over 10 years. What makes you think these people get anything out of waterfall except knowing that they can give you the documents and you won't yell at them? And he said, oh, all right, when you put it like that. Senior managers sometimes have these funny conclusions. Because back when they were doing technical work, if they did any technical work, it was not with the complex systems we're doing today. And if they haven't done technical work for over 20 years, they really don't know about this. They have no idea how much harder it is to get stuff done. So, and over 20 years ago, waterfall sort of, kind of, maybe worked in some circumstances. I didn't use it then either. But you could make it work with a really disciplined team and a really disciplined project manager. You could make it work if you had to. And so I think Agile really helps. And lean, especially when you think about applying it to management and management decisions, and being able to say, this is number one, this is number two. Let's not start everything. Let's finish some things and then take something else. Let's finish something, take something else. Let's finish something and take something else. That's reducing the whole notion of work in progress is a huge thing. And once managers realize the strategic advantage of doing that, they won't go back. But you might have to help them realize that advantage. So managing the portfolio is really not easy, but it's necessary if you want to be successful. So there's a bunch of stuff that I have for resources, and I believe I have 6 or 7 or 8 minutes for questions, Eugene. So that's the end of my formal remarks, and you could tell how formal they are. What questions do you have? Yes, sir, Steve.
It's interesting. Last week I was speaking at a project management conference here in Vancouver. And one of the things that struck me is how a lot of the project managers, their views and their problems are very different from what we believe their problems are. And I have a concern that in our community, we tend to look at, well, the problems we're having in the organization is with management. We seem to burden management with a lot of the problems. That somehow if management could just see things our way, the organization would run much better. And yet, we are the software group. And I'm just wondering if we're starting to develop an inward-looking attitude that somehow as a software group, we know the better way to run the organization. I'm just curious here, how many people here would consider themselves to be in middle management or even upper management of a company? And are there concerns, basically, do they see that the concerns of the software group carry through towards the organization? And also whether we, as software developers, do have a good idea of what is taking place, what the day-to-day trials and tribulations of the managers are within the organization.
So let me ask that question, because that's a great question. Do we, even the people in this room, do you have any idea what the day-to-day trials and tribulations of the managers in the organization are? Right? You think so? Can you name a few? Making sure the work gets done, is that what you said? Okay.
I think visibility, same thing, right? Getting that visibility, what's really in progress, and is it really coming along the way that is it really?
Is it really? Wait, there's always this question that people ask me, right? I'm a consultant. People rarely ask me to come in when things are going well. That's right, right? So when sometimes the middle managers say, I don't think this team is making the progress that they should, but I don't have any data. I don't know how to tell. And the senior managers certainly would like some data. They would like to know how to tell. Other trials and tribulations?
Conflict.
Conflict. Yes, sir? Yeah?
Once we are done, making decisions, this might impact the ability to meet payroll.
So I think this ability to meet payroll, though, where do we get our revenue from? And it doesn't matter if you're an IT organization or a product organization. It doesn't matter if you're a soft money organization. I'm working with an organization right now that exists on soft money only. They have 7 developers and 15 projects. And right, I mean, they can't have an allocated person to a given project. They can't. They have to do something else. And this notion of we have to show enough progress so we can keep the grant money coming in, so we can keep people on salary, so we can then do the stuff, right? So it's this feed chain, chain of some sort. So Steve, did you have a particular trial or tribulation you were thinking of?
I was just thinking of a wide variety of the clients that I have go into whether they're IT organizations or whether they're product. One gentleman here mentioned one of the big ones for a smaller company. Can I make payroll next week? That's a huge one. The other one is for a lot of salespeople that I've worked with. Am I going to make quota this month?
And the question is, if I'm worried about the ability to make quota, right, first of all, how am I paid? Which goes to the incentive thing. If you get salespeople typically get paid in one of two ways. When they make the sale, which is very common, which incents them to promise anything, or when the product is delivered, which incents them to promise what the team can deliver, and also pushes very much on the team, the product development team, to quickly deliver. Right, so this, whether it's revenue in some fashion or payroll or whatever, it doesn't matter what kind of an organization you're in, you have to be able to release product, right? You have to get product through the system so you can release it, so you can get whatever benefit it is from this product, and maybe it's enough revenue for payroll. Eugene.
There is one more I would mention, and you said about this organization that has 7 developers and 15 projects, they have to do something differently. This is their reality. I think that quite often people in trenches do not appreciate enough the amount of reality that managers deal with. Call it politics, call it interests, but it is the reality, and they have to maneuver in order to protect the team, and that is a very hard work quite often.
So it's extremely difficult work. Let me tell you just a little story. The reason I wrote the project portfolio management book is because I kept encountering managers who had encountered something that happened to me back in 1990. I walked into an organization, first as the director of, well, they called it the director of QA. It meant Uber testing manager, because they didn't want any process and they didn't want any metrics, but that's fine. And they fired the director of development about 3 months after I got there. And I had been managing developers. I was quite happy, so they said, JR, we want you to manage the developers. They had just had a big layoff, so we'd gone from 150 to, I don't know, 100 or 75 developers. We had technical debt out the wazoo. We had a very important customer who accounted for 90% of our revenue. And we know that's stupid, like, okay, fine. Yelling at us because we had so many defects they could not deploy the system. And I had defects to fix, a program to finish, and several other projects that we were supposed to get done now, right, whatever that means. And everyone was working on everything and everyone was frantic. It was horrible. And after 2 weeks of making no progress at all, I gathered my managers, because I was a director, I was a middle manager, and I said, we can't do this anymore. We have to finish something. I don't know what that something is, but we have to finish it. So let's make a list. We had stickies, right? It's contemporary enough that we had stickies. We made a sticky of every single thing we had to do. They filled my whiteboard. And I said, what's the first thing we have to do and why? We stack ranked them. We didn't have this question of business value. I wasn't mature enough to know we could do that. We thought about that for a while. And then we came up with the first 3 things. And so at least we had 3. And I said, okay, who do we need to do number 1? Okay, Tom, Dick, and Harry. We assigned Tom, Dick, and Harry to number 1. I put their names on the sticky. I moved it over to the other wall. I said, who do we need to do number 2? Tom, Dick, and Harry. I said, oh, no. That's not an option. Tom, Dick, and Harry are taken. They're taken for at least a week, maybe 2. We don't know. They're not going to do this. We can have Ellen, Elise, and Ezra. None of these names were there. Okay. So we gave Ellen, Elise, and Ezra the next one, and then we did it until we ran out of people. And I said, in 2 weeks, we're going to meet again, and we're going to see what got done. Luckily, Tom, Dick, and Harry finished their work. Well, because my management threatened to fire me, right? Because no longer was I going to have everyone working on everything. And I said, you can, look, if you fire me, I don't have the stress of trying to deal with this. It's fine, fire me, right? I mean, I don't care, right? And my poor husband has been the recipient of many phone calls that say, honey, yeah, they might fire me today. Okay, when will you know? right? So, because my mouth gets me in trouble. So I did this for 2 weeks, and we finished the first 3 really important fixes, and then we finally worked on the program, and I was able to free up more people. We finished the program in 2 or 3 months, something like that. And then we moved into regular. I had already been using an incremental life cycle. I understood about incremental life cycle, and I knew about time boxes. I hadn't figured out to put the 2 together to have a releasable product at the end of the time box. But I knew how to use the tools of the trade, and so we did that. And after about 4 months, we finally got down to having only the number of projects that fit the number of people. And to have a conversation with management on a regular basis about why we could not have more projects. They had to decide. And so, did my actions save the company? Based on what I know now, it allowed us to make revenue for those 4 months. I had no idea at the time it was that bad, right? So as Eugene says, managers have these very tricky negotiation waters to deal with, and it's really difficult. Oh, and now I'm over time. Okay, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.